I feel like we have in this space today a gift of somebody who has lived in this space of these kinds of conversations and what it means for congregations for a really long time, and has devoted much of his ministry and his part of his life to this. And so, without further ado, I know Dr. Stewart will give you some of his own bio, but it's just such a privilege to have you with us. So, welcome.
Thank you, Barb. First of all, I want to apologize for the mask. I had a double lung transplant about 5 years ago, and I'm immunosuppressed. So, if any of you are carrying bugs, I don't want them. All right. Next, drop the doctor part. I'm retired. I'm now represented to be an ordinary human being. The next thing I want to say is that this is a big document, and it's a very natural question to say, why? And why so many words? The ELCA abounds in words. We are really good at generating words. But why do we need this many words on this topic? And I won't go through the history of why we did this. I just want to say the ELCA actually had no real statement on the purpose of government. And that's why I advanced that resolution. And so we got it now. But when we think about it, you know, there's a lot of suggestions at the end, very specific suggestions, and you know, we could start there. But that's not really the point of the document, as far as I'm concerned. And I think about it, you know, there's 6 sections, and we start with the foundations, and then we end up with the advice at the end. But if you, I gotta take this thing off. I assume none of you have bugs. I mean, just it makes me think of a builder. Let's say you want to have a house built, okay? And so you talk with your builder and say, I want a balcony on this house. Show me the balcony first, right? The builder's going to say, no, wait a second. Before you have the balcony, you have to have the frame of the house. And before you have the frame, you've got to put in the foundation. Okay? And so the point of this document is to reach all the way back, set up a foundation, then that which will make plausible everything that follows. Not that we're all going to agree with everything that follows, but I do want to put in words for the people who wrote this thing, because they've actually done a very good job of developing a consistent, logical argument without too much repetition, which is a great sin in the ELCA. They have done that, set this up so that we can understand why and how they get to the conclusions at the end. If you start with the conclusions, it's like trying to put a balcony on, it falls. Okay? So we want to understand from the word, from the very foundation. And I think this document has got good survival value. In fact, I've been thinking this ought to be in seminaries. They ought to be teaching this in seminaries. There is one word I want to say about how this was, how it came about. It's not just one person hiding behind a curtain who wrote this thing. They set up a task force, and the task force, they draw from the variety of people in the congregation. We got some, red hot Republicans, and we got some very blue Democrats, and we got all kinds of people participating in this, which means they had to hammer it out. It takes 3 years to do a social statement, because they have to meet, talk, they go, make presentations at home, they come back, they talk some more, they hash it out, and then some blessed soul or a couple then sit down and kind of put the whole thing together. And I happen to know the 2 writers who did this. One is Roger Miller. I don't know if any of you know him. He was the head of theological ethics at the church for many years. The other one is Kyle Pacewark, who's in Wyoming. Very smart people who ultimately kind of put the whole thing together. So I think we've got a document that will last. Okay, now that's my personal view. You are not obliged to share that view in any sense. All right, so I was a teacher at Concordia. I didn't lecture. I don't like to lecture, and I'm not going to lecture you on this. what I used to do was Q&A. So I'm going to start off with a few questions. All right, you don't have to have read the document to do the questions, but this is just so you can get a little more sense of where we're at. And I should mention, by the way, just so you have a sense of who I am, I'm not a Minnesota native. All right, I'm from New Jersey, which means I get a little pushy at times. Don't take it personally. Okay, I married into Minnesota. My wife is from Edina, and we were both teaching in Concordia. Do we have any Cobbers here? We got a Cobber. Wonderful. When? What year?
90.
90. Great. Anybody else? Yes?
Carrie.
What time? What year?
69.
Oh my God. Good for you. All right. Good. I started in 87. I don't think you remember the new class meeting. Oh, you're lucky. All right. So what I used to do with my students, sometimes they really like this, is I do a blind poll. I would face away from them so they wouldn't feel like they were being personally, tracked. And I'd ask a few questions. All right, so I'm going to turn away and ask you some questions. Tell me if you can't hear me, right, even when I face away. All right, how many of you think that religion is primarily about faith formation and getting your own spiritual life in order? Put your hands up. Just give me a general count. Somebody just yell it out.
6, 7.
Whoa. Very good. All right. How many of you think that politics is dirty?
Think that what?
Politics is
How many of you think politics is dirty?
Today?
Let's say for the last 10 years. All right, how many of you think politics has been dirty for the last 10 years?
half. 2/3.
2/3. Yeah, just general numbers are quite good. All right, how many of you thinks that religion should keep itself clean by staying away from politics?
Three.
All right. Well, you're already persuaded. We can end the session right now. See, the point of this document, as far as I can tell, is with the foundation to say why Christians should be involved in politics. Why we should be involved. Now, this is not something that's been generally widely acceptable. I'm kind of impressed by where you're at on this. Think of the German Christians in the 1930s. Okay? My father was the pastor of the American Church in Berlin during the 1930s. And so he had a lot to say about this. He wrote letters at home about this and so forth. And he said, only 10% of the people in the church in Germany were real Nazis. Only 10%. But a lot of the rest of them thought we have to keep religion clean of politics. And you see where that leads you, right? If you keep that separation. And there was a very strong movement in German Lutheranism to stay clear of politics. But, and this is where we start getting to the foundations, why should we be open to civic engagement? Why should we be open to civic engagement? Okay. So we start off, and Bill, I'll ask you about this. I just want to ask a question. Actually, I want to get your opinions here. Why should we be civically engaged? Now, this happens at all different kinds of levels. It means you could be, helping out with the, what do you call them, the highway, cleaning up the highways, right? It means you could be on your county council. It could mean that you are on the PTA, whatever. Why? Why not just sit home and enjoy all those wonderful Netflix movies?
Our voice matters. To bring ethics.
Well, in an authoritarian regime, our voice doesn't matter, right? So, okay, I'm sorry.
To bring ethics to the table.
Yeah, okay, good. All right. Yeah, to remind our politicians what our values are. Kind of thing. All right, good.
We're part of the civic life. We're part of the community.
We are. Now, see, now we're starting to dig towards the foundation. Why are, oh, go ahead.
Oh, it's just part of our baptismal calling.
Okay, why is it part of our baptismal calling?
To work for peace and justice and all of it.
Yep, okay, that's a little further down the route, but yeah, keep going.
I think for me, it's like trying to fill gaps where the government or politics doesn't filter through. So with my neighbors, with people in my community,
Okay, so things that maybe the federal government can't do, things that maybe the state government can't do, and so on down the line. All right, good. But I'm still, I'm sorry, I was trained at the University of Chicago, and I always ask why questions. I'm sorry, I'm just obnoxious. You kind of keep digging, keep digging. You're not there yet. Oh, well, you can cheat and look at the first section. Okay? Now, the way this is set up, it has, short paragraphs for each article for like the first 4 or 5 pages. So that's your executive summary, right? And then you get into the deeper, starting on page 10, where you get into more of a discussion. So the first section, starting on page 11, is the foundational teaching. All right? And if you can really skim fast, think back to your college education. All right, so like Article 2, keep going, we start off with the earth is the Lord's and all that's in it, and so forth. So on, pull anything out of there that sounds familiar, sounds good? I'm sorry?
I didn't hear your question.
Oh, just pull something out of there. Just go down there and pull something out, and let's throw it out for us all to consider.
Peace, shalom.
Thank you. Yes, shalom. All right, that's the big theme here. It starts right up front, shalom. What is shalom? How many of you heard the term before? Put up your hands. Okay, everybody's heard the word. And where does it come from? Hebrew, yeah. It's from the Old Testament. It actually doesn't appear in the New Testament. There's a irene, which means peace, is sort of the equivalent in the New Testament. But it has a meaning which has been developing over time. And here, can you find exactly what it means here?
The well-being of all.
The well-being of all. It is a rich, fulfilling, interconnected life. So this is the moral aim. It's the moral aim of God's creation. It's not a neutral creation that can be described only in terms of, biology or whatever. It's a creation that has a built-in moral purpose to it, put into it by God. Okay? So, shalom. Then the question is, okay, who does it include and how does it come about? So you can see anything there about that? And yell out page numbers if you find something.
includes everybody.
Yes. And that, when you start to think about it, honestly, I have to say for many years I didn't think about this. But when you think about that, it's like, oh, it includes everybody. And so then this tentacles of interconnection and whatever go everywhere. And that makes it kind of difficult to say, well, these so-called people are not included. That's a non-starter, right? But that's a very big issue today. Who is in and who is out? And Lutheran theology says everybody. Now this is a universalist faith. We're not a particularist faith. We are a universalist faith. Everyone is included. There's no grounds for excluding anybody because God included them. If God included them, we are in no position to say, hi. Now, that's hard to hang on to, especially when politics goes in the direction of trying to identify the good inner group by defining itself against the outer group, the non-group, the other. In graduate study, we always talk about othering. Othering. Othering is when you find grounds to exclude other people. Okay, so that's kind of the foundation here. And if we had grounds to say, well, God, from the start, God preferred white males. With a whole Adam, he was white, right? What? If we had grounds for that, then we could be, the old South Africa. But we don't. We absolutely do not. And so that's an important part of preaching, starting to talk civic engagement is starting at that point, that nobody's excluded. And it's not easy. Let me tell you, it is not easy. There's so many strong human tendencies to say that, well, I'm different than so-and-so, or I'm better than so. Very strong. You're never going to get rid of that. That's in us. That's part of the sin that we
Well, that's not only othering others, but it's othering ourselves.
got. Explain that. What you mean by
I mean, yeah, we identify ourselves as different. It's making us the one that's different as opposed to the one outside oneself. It's interesting that we can other both ways.
Yeah, right. Drawing distinctions that have no grounding in the reality as we see it through eyes of faith. All right, so we're into the foundation there. Now, what does this mean for our lives in terms of this civic engagement? And we get into talk of power. Now, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble finding pages here. So it is a discussion of power that's very helpful. There. I can't read my own writing. That's not good. All right.
It's mentioned at the top of page 12. God's power, top of page 12, God's power is experienced as disruption and judgment.
Okay. Yes.
It
Yes.
tears down construction.
Okay. Yes, and this is where we get the theology across here. Turn to page 12. Good. Now, but the part I'm looking for is, I'm just going to have to say this. It's in here. Trust me. Power is, we tend to think that if God's power is all-encompassing, that means that, we're just secondary. That God's power is what accomplishes things. And we do affirm that. But the question is, well, where does that power go? How does it operate? Well, it is delegated to us. And this is another thing that Lutherans traditionally have had a little trouble saying because we worry about works righteousness. You all know what works righteousness is? Yeah, okay. All right. Got to stay away from that sticky thing. But having saying that we can't engineer our own salvation does not mean that we don't have agency. Yes, we have agency. And the agency comes from God. And if we deny that and say, I'm going to wait for God to fix it, well, buddy, get off the roof. Did you see that thing? There was a flood in New Orleans, and the guy sitting on the roof and kept saying, I'm waiting for God to come and get me, and a boat would come by, and he'd say, no, I'm waiting for God. Well, nah, okay. Agency is crucial to our being. So now what shape does this agency take? And there's a little attack in here on individualism. I'm sorry, I can't think of that immediately. Individualism is when you set your agency in priority to all others and your well-being and so forth. But the ELCA affirms here very strongly that it's not individualism, but what they call mutual
Self-determination?
What?
Self-determination?
Thank you. Mutual self-determination. Someone reads faster than I do. Mutual self-determination. The agency part is you exercise this through self-determination. But they throw in the word mutual because it is interactive. And that's all part of being in creation when you've got everything going together, connected, that there's going to be interaction, and that is fundamental. Which is why I was so glad to hear you go chatting before we started. There you are, building connections, connecting, right? Yeah, that's what we humans do. Yak. Okay? So that's interaction. Interaction and self-determination. And then you can see why this, okay, now we're starting to understand civic engagement is a form of mutual self-determination. Okay, how are we doing? Questions, thoughts? Please feel free to criticize or anything like that. I got thoughts. So, if you're not happy with any of this, say that because we need to address it. Oh, 100%. Wow. That far. Yes?
I was wondering, could you talk more about, you said in 1930s Germany there was a push to keep religion and church pure and clean from
Right.
the sick or the dirtiness of politics.
Yeah.
How do you see that in our country?
It's when you have churches that declare their superiority, that they have the truth, and they're not going to let it be sullied by anything that contradicts what they believe, and that's one dimension of it. It's also when you have churches that say, we won't have anything to do with politics because we are preparing people for the kingdom of God. And politics is just going to get people stuck in dirt. I've noticed this in preaching. Some people preachers can't get away from the kingdom of God. I think that's it. Well, no, there's the kingdom of the world, right? And the question is, and this is where you've got to get creative, is how do the two touch each other and connect with each other? So it's not just about salvation. It's not just about our one-on-one relations with God, but then how does that then connect and affect the way that we are related to others and engaged in obeying the law and everything else. And that's when I wrote this little social message for the church, I kind of put that in the way that the kingdoms connect. Because it's so easy to dualize them and say, my salvation, ultimately that's all that matters, is my salvation, my personal salvation. And the ELCA is saying, no. What matters is your interconnectedness with everything else. And of course that gets overwhelming, right? How can you connect to what do you have, 9 billion people at this point in the world? How do you interconnect with all of them? Well, you don't. But you have communities which are part of, connect to larger communities and so forth, and you go out and seek and encounter people and learn about them and connect with them, and that is living. That is living out creation. That's why I tell my students, I always do a little lecture about how to get through your 20s. The 20s are a rough time. Who am I going to marry somebody? What profession am I going to have? Where am I going to live? You get all these big choices. And the Germans had a brilliant idea about this. Wanderjahre. Anybody know that expression? Go. Leave your community. Go out and connect. Go elsewhere. And in the late 60s, when I grew up, this was pretty big. Young people just, take off. Rick Steves is a perfect example. He's got a book about this. I want to read it. But he went, from Istanbul all the way over to Burma or whatever. And sometimes you get help. I mean, when I was graduating from college, guess what? We had a war going on. I got drafted. And I said, I'm not going to kill anybody. So I went to Vietnam for 2 years with Lutheran Relief. And I don't think I had much of a helpful impact. I mean, I was a farmer and whatnot, but by George, it was a learning experience. So you get out in the world, connect and learn, develop these connections, which hopefully some of them you'll carry for the rest of your life, and that will mean so much as you get older. So I'm sorry, I'm kind of wandering, getting away from this statement, but that's that view of creation, interconnected, comprehensive, universal, that I think is just a wonderful foundation for our teaching in the ELCA as a universalist church. Yeah, go ahead.
So what's the historical foundation that underlies this document? What has happened in terms of the evolution of the role of the church and our faith that will lead to the articles in here?
Historically, I think the people that kind of got to work on this once the resolution was approved and the church assembly said, we want this statement. I think what they were reacting to was that tendency towards privatism and saying, the ELCA has not been as dynamic in national leadership like the UCC of the Presbyterians who kept generating presidents, right? How many ELCA presidents have we had? Will we ever get one? Hope so. But who knows? But I think is a reaction against that unfortunate past in Germany. I think that affected us. I had a theologian who did a lot of digging into the Civil War time, and he said if you went to Synod, if you read the notes from Synod assemblies during the Civil War, you couldn't even tell there was a Civil War going. Wow. And so somebody else had a hand. Yes?
You began with the question when you look the other way, who thinks politics is dirty?
Yeah.
And I understand the reaction. I understood the reaction. I'm into politics.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in office. What helps me with this is politics as opposed to civil participation. I believe that civil participation in a nonpartisan way is not politics. To volunteer for civic duty is not politics. And I think if you would have asked that question as opposed to politics being dirty, I think you would have gotten a lot of people that didn't think civic duty and civic participation and civic volunteering is dirty. That's the way I see it anyway.
Okay, right. Good point. Anybody else want? I thought I saw that. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and this is sort of along the same lines, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are on, in politics, there's usually there's divisions. There's this side and that side.
Right.
And I'm wondering about how, in our faith, we really want to make sure that we're doing the right thing, we're following the right path. And how can you lean into civic engagement and walk into that space and accept that in order for God's love to be all, then all beliefs and all ideas must have a space. And how do you walk in that?
Well,
genuinely love your neighbor. That's how you do that. We all need to genuinely love our neighbor, not just when it's convenient, when it's inconvenient as well, when it's hard. We need to love our neighbor.
But how do you do that though when everybody has a different definition of what genuinely loving is? Because that's what I've been struggling with, right? Like the way I see genuinely loving someone, somebody else would be like, you're actually not genuinely loving them because you're putting their salvation at risk, right? So how do you do that? How do you genuinely love when everybody's definition of that is different?
Yeah, go ahead.
One, how do you do that when, like, at a church, when, like, I'm looking to hear messages from my pastor and have conversations with my fellow congregation members for that genuine love when their definition is so different, and it's like, how do we live in that interconnected space when we're all coming for something, but we're all coming at, like, how do you lead through that?
But at the same time, we're human beings, and that's why we can't do that. But we can sure pray about it and ponder it and discuss it and hope for it. But we're human beings and we fall short. And we're forgiven for that. Very important.
You need to look at every connection with other people as a learning experience. I live amongst Catholics. I'm a strong Lutheran living, my whole neighborhood, all of my best friends are Catholics. We have had conversations that are amazing. We're very close people, we agree to disagree.
Mhm. Mhm. And this, you will find in here, the discussion of this, and we had talked about, okay, section 2, God calls all people to robust civic participation.
What page are you on?
Oh, this starts page 20.
Thank you.
It's, let's see, but actually, let's see. Okay, what is recommended is a certain kind of robust listening. That you can't just simply drop your ideas in and expect other people to follow them. You need to listen. And we've had, memory. I've been trying to reconstitute my memory ever since I've had incredible quantities of prednisone. And it's not easy. But we had one in Ron Duty doing this, is developing a way of listening in order to bring people into a conversational orbit, respecting their opinions, but doing the preliminary work of setting up conversations then to try to persuade people of something different. Okay, so that's the words. I lose the words here. Okay. Page
25, page 25,
Yeah,
article
this
14.
is in the section. All right, what are you seeing there?
Discerning the best course of action requires considering many different facets of any situation. There's another line I just read. But,
Here we go.
later on, a safe space does not mean a space where all agree. Responsibility for safe space means providing space where all are honored and valued regardless of what they believe. This is true even as worshiping communities disagree or struggle together to discern the common good.
Right. Yeah. Okay, we have this term, we call it community of moral deliberation. That's the jargon. Where we have, and the word discernment. Discernment is a very special term in graduate study. It refers to developing the capacity to look very carefully and understand nuance and to be able to appreciate difference in the multiple approaches that people are engaged in. So it's a skill. Okay? And we're, this is upfront. It's considered a very important part of participating in civic engagement. Now, it gets active at times, and this is, if you go to page 26, that there's the prophetic presence part. And that is where there may be occasions where you're seeing mercy and justice being violated and need to call attention to them, just like the Old Testament prophets do. Okay? And that's an important part of civic engagement as well. But not to the point of preachy exclusivism, moral superiority kind of stuff. And everything's subject to distortion and exaggeration. So then from there, then we can move on into faith-based advocacy. And we have, of course, the advocacy offices in Washington and elsewhere that will go knock on congressional doors and say, this is our church's perspective based on our social teachings that were adopted by the whole church. We want you to keep these in mind. So, specific kinds of advocacy. All right? So, that reminds me of another distinction I wanted to make. Part of the challenge here, and I'm going to move the topic slightly, is engagement with a secular institution. And see, a lot of people are uncomfortable with that and think that they have to say, okay, the U.S. actually, our U.S. government is actually religious. You know, we have the U.S. Constitution, which was a religious, founded religiously. Well, no, it wasn't. No. Talk about George Washington, what he thought about religion. He was not an evangelical, shall we say. But having what the ELCA wants to say here is that, and that's the whole third section, which is very good, about the Constitution, what we should think of the Constitution as a secular document, and why we should engage with it in full confidence that it reflects what God wants in terms of democracy and protecting religious rights and so forth. That full-hearted support is appropriate. It's not something that you're straying away from your true religion if you embrace this secular document. Now that's going to be hard for a lot of people to do that. We're not saying it's a religious document. We're just saying that we are fully confident that this document, the Constitution, secular document, expresses that kind of foundational connectedness that the ELCA stands for. Does this make sense? I hope. Right. Which drives me to the major thing that I get out of this. It's a long, hard document to read, and I wouldn't suggest doing it when reading. I can't. But it doesn't hurt to just dive into places and just keep checking things out. But the purpose of the document is to instill confidence that God wants us civically engaged and that the government we have is reflective of God's purposes. Okay? We're not going to ram it down people's throats because other people have different forms of government. We're not going to make a judgment about that ours is superior to anything like that. We're just saying we can be fully confident that we are engaged in a secular institution with confidence that our faith is behind us.
How do you keep the distinction between having confidence in God's purpose through the Constitution, through government, and then some who make the move that the government is then ordained by God?
That's right. And they've got very good wording here about that, which I'm afraid I can't replicate at this point. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but what I keep coming back to is the foundation that each person or community comes to social life and civic engagement with.
Mm-hmm.
Just especially thinking about the church in like the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, like during the Red Scare, like that period,
Mm-hmm.
and just the association that many people who grew up during that time have with some of these more communal teachings and this theological framework that we are all intertwined as being associated with communism and the Soviet Union and things like that, so being turned off by language such as this that calls for, that's very scripturally and biblically grounded in our faith tradition, but just from a broader like American cultural sense, has been impacted so that people are turned off by even just the fact of I need to step in and care for my neighbor and community because their salvation is intertwined with my own personal salvation that I've had preached to me growing up and told that you need to do these things in order to live a faithful life so that your soul can go to heaven.
Well, you need to do this in order to help sustain creation. It's not going to get your salvation right. It doesn't bear on your salvation. For all we know, Hitler's in heaven. Hard for me to imagine, okay? Well, then we get into Dante. Oh, Dante's wonderful. read the Inferno. It's an amazing work that helps you understand why the world is such a hell. But anyhow, yeah, and people get turned off, right? And then the question is, how then do you re-engage? And I think you need to connect with the foundation to do that. If you've gotten turned off, yeah, go ahead.
So you answered earlier to my question that the historians determined that there was a role and a responsibility for us to be civically engaged.
Right.
Where are the guardrails to prevent an abuse and a misuse of that involvement?
Mm-hmm. This is where good old Christian humility comes into play.
And prayer.
And what?
Prayer.
Prayer. Okay. Yeah, the theology of the cross here humbles us to realize, A, we can't achieve our own salvation, and B, look at the horrible things people do, and we are going to try to avoid that. So, but we get dropped into the world, the real world of politics is a world of negotiation. Negotiating burdens and benefits. That's what politics is about. Who's going to pay? Who's going to provide? Where's the money going to come from? All that kind of stuff. And the guardrails are broken, easily broken. I don't want to get too current about this, but a lot of guardrails have been broken, right? Mm-hmm. And to rebuild them takes the reconstruction of trust through people taking some risk to step in where there's a mess and trying to clean it up and restore the trustworthiness of institutions. And that's why I regret so much what's happening, because it's going to take decades to recover, right? Decades. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to mention, if you're looking for the section in this document on guardrails, I would recommend starting with Article 32 on page 49,
okay,
which talks about the ELCA's recommended approach to the free exercise clause. And I think if you read that whole thing, it's just about 4 pages long. You'll get a sense of what they think the guardrails are intended to be for us. Obviously, every church is going to do different things with the free exercise clause, but in this room, that seems to be a good place to start with what you're looking for.
Thank you. It says, right, religious accommodations should not damage important public interests. So your religion does not authorize you to scrap whatever laws that is inconsistent with your values. That's putting a lot of importance on the secular arrangement.
So it's a balancing act for us in terms of our own civic engagement, as well as protecting the rights of civic engagement for all.
It has to be negotiated.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. In fact, at this point, we're starting to get practical here. Why not move to the last section where it takes up specific issues and see if there's anything in particular that you might want to talk about now that we've nailed down the foundation. The first topic, this is page 58 and following. So polarization, money, let's see, truthfulness, the fallibility of government versus the oppressiveness. This is where we are making distinctions that help us provide guardrails. So if any of those grab your attention, especially ones you don't agree with.
Professor?
Yes,
Sorry.
please, go ahead.
Maybe it's not specific in here, but to kind of bridge these two. I guess a concern I have has to do with not the sort of extreme civic engagement, but the reticence to be involved civically at
Yes,
all.
right.
And so I understand the concept of suggesting that God calls us as a
Yes.
church, as congregations and so on, as groups.
Right.
Is the idea that God calls individuals to civic engagement too? And if so, what's the role of a church in suggesting to people, get out there and vote, do something about your community? I mean, what's the role of trying to invigorate folks to that? One of the things I struggle with a lot is people I know I disagree with in some way, and I don't know how to overcome it when they say, oh, I don't look at the news. I don't bother with that. Oh, I'm not going to research that.
Yeah.
This like deliberate ignorance of a particular issue. Or
Mhm.
I have to
They're
keep
walling
my,
themselves off.
yeah, I have to keep my mental health. I can't
Yeah.
watch the news. That choice has repercussions that I find it hard to point out.
Yeah, well, that's precisely what this document is trying to do, is to get people through that wall. And, you know, it has some interesting affirmations here that I haven't much seen elsewhere. One is how you treat government employees. And the default position is respect for what they're doing. It's so easy to say, oh, that government payroll bloated, blah, blah, blah. And in cases, that may be the case. But how can we engage the trust of those government employees unless we respect them? And it's so easy to say, oh, government, right? Well, that doesn't help. So that's a guardrail of its sort. But you're saying, how do we persuade people to get engaged?
Well, I guess I'm asking first and foremost, is that our call to encourage people to be engaged at the individual level?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. That is, you can see that in the message. I didn't write that part. It was in the message about encouraging doing all kinds of activities that would qualify as civic engagement. And because we know that we are, by God's creation, interconnected. And then that then implies a responsibility to help keep the whole ecosystem going. And if you say, oh, I'm going to let somebody else do it, and nobody steps forward, then it's like, maybe you should have stepped forward. I think. Always room for guilt and regret. That's very good at that, Lutheranism. Guilt and regret. That was supposed to be funny. Come on. Just like my wife says. She says, you know, I forgive you, but I'll never forget. That's what happened when I married into Minnesota. I don't know if that's.
I think there's a parallel on what you were saying there in terms of people not getting involved, right? It's not just in the political sphere, but this is in all levels of public engagement. I mean, pastors and congregational leaders are seeing this just in terms of the volunteer role within congregational life. It's almost become a blood in, blood out, right? You have the office till you're dead, okay? And just trying to get people to round that out. I think it's a pastoral issue.
Well,
it's on a larger sense.
It's deeply embedded in American culture. Who was that French philosopher who came over to Tocqueville, right? And he talked about individualism. What he meant by individualism was that people who just retreat into their families and friends and let the rest of the world go. And we're talking early 19th century. And it's still here, right? So that's what we're working on. Yeah. Yes, please.
This is off the subject, but I have to say, those are great socks.
Thank you. My daughter has a pit bull. And my wife saw these and she couldn't resist. This is when you have a teacher, you have your idiosyncrasy allowance. Socks, anything. Go. Yeah.
When you were speaking just now about the idea kind of this individualism retreating into our own welfare, it made me think immediately of the story of creation in Genesis and the response of Adam and Eve as soon as things start to go awry. The way that it becomes a retreat Well, I didn't do that, they did that.
Yeah.
Or I'm more concerned, this instinct for personal survival,
Mhm.
and that slowly maybe becomes about family survival or national survival.
Right.
But how that, it's not just 19th century. I think it's all the way back to human creation, and this kind of, we're constantly having to work against that, or push against it as God's people, resist that temptation to be the ones who say, I'm the one who matters most in this space, which is why the first commandment is the first commandment in my humble opinion.
That's why you what?
The first commandment is the first commandment in my opinion, because it's the most important one. There's only one God. Like there's only one, and the rest of us aren't it. So it just made me think of that moment.
That's really good. That's really God.
Yeah, this is a big theme in Dietrich Bonhoeffer, you know, that connectedness. And he laid down this impossibility thing that you should feel responsible for everything. Oh, in Germany? But it's what we have to continually try to enlarge our horizons and our capacity to respond to others. That's why the time in Vietnam was so good for me. An entirely different culture. Boy, that was a struggle. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
So beyond our conversation here, what will the ELCA do with these 91 pages?
They send them out almost for free. Sessions like this, I mean, we just hope that somebody gets interested and picks it up. As I said, I think it should be part of the seminary curriculum.
They create study guides as well for congregational use and Bible studies. There's
Okay.
usually a whole, after it's passed at the Churchwide Assembly, a whole selection of resources that kind of slow roll, because they don't create them until it's been passed.
We never run out of words.
But I don't think it's what will the ELCA do. I think the question is, what will we do with this document?
Well, in terms of providing direction or focus, or is it just, here it is, play with this, do what you want with it? Or is there some kind of a commitment by the organization being
Take a look at page 89. Page 89.
Through 91. There are a bunch of commitments.
Yeah, see, right. But the point is, when an issue comes up and the Churchwide Assembly wants it addressed, and then the people in Chicago have to come up with something, these documents are what they use because they've been passed by the whole church, and therefore they are authoritative, and they can be drawn upon in order to issue more social messages or whatever, and then we can be confident that the church is behind us on this. So if you articulate this, you've got the church assembly behind you.
And the drafting process is also something to take note of, all right? This was not written and sent out like ex cathedra. This is what the big church says. The way that social statements are passed is that they go through multiple rounds of voting at churchwide assemblies. Drafts are then sent out to every congregation, every pastor, everybody gets a copy of the draft with the hope that they'll engage in conversation with the congregation to submit feedback. And then the drafting committee takes that feedback and works it into subsequent drafts. And then it goes through another round of voting. And when the Churchwide Assembly votes on these, it requires a supermajority to pass. So if your pastor hasn't invited your congregation to join in conversation about social statements as they're being drafted, talk to them about that and encourage them to do so. Some are hard, like 2009, the social statement on human sexuality. I know a lot of congregations that wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole because they were scared. And all that does is make it easier to say, well, no, there's a bunch of eggheads in an ivory tower that came up with this innovative nonsense that I don't support. Well, if you didn't participate in the conversation, if you didn't give some feedback, you kind of lost your right to complain.
One thing that I've come to appreciate about the ELCA, I was not happy with the Lutheran Church in America. When the time when I went to Vietnam, I thought they were too timorous and didn't oppose the war and this kind of stuff. But by now, I think thanks to the documents, we could be a flywheel of political sanity. a flywheel of political sanity as things go on extremes on either end. That this is the kind of thing our nation needs at this point. You know, politics as negotiation, politics not as domination. There's a big attack here on the notion of power as domination, right? Because it's so tempting to authoritarian rulers and so forth. Well, just beat the shit out of the people and they'll do what you want. No. Power is enablement. Power is sharing the capacity to do things. And so, you know, there's room for patriotism, love of nation. Absolutely. No problem with patriotism, but not the kind of, you know, Christian nationalism that asserts the superiority. At our church, we do this thing called Night Songs. It's a concert and it draws a lot of people in, and we sing Finlandia. And I'm in the choir, and it brought tears to our faces. In this time of separateness, of assertions of American superiority, we're going to beat the shit out of Cuba, and we're going to beat the shit out of Iran and everybody else. And Finlandia says, all nations have blue skies. That's, you know, the flywheel of political sanity. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm talking too much. Others, thoughts.
We
We
have
gotta
4
conclude here.
minutes, so if
4
anybody
minutes.
has a burning question
Burn it up.
or comments that you'd like
Or-
to
yeah.
share.
Yes, please.
I'll just share that when the draft of this came out, our church had a Bible study using that draft. All of the elements in this have a biblical basis. And we did provide one little piece of feedback in the process, but basically, I'm just left with the thought that we probably need to do that with every draft social statement that comes out, because there are resolutions every year, and I don't think we've ever done that before, but it was a really good process.
That's our polity. Keeping the top, the bottom connected through consultation. Absolutely. Now, this church thrives on active congregations. And, you know, the people at the central headquarters, you know, they need people fighting at their butts. Good thing. Good. Anybody else comment? Who wants the last word? Go ahead, you want the last word?
I just had a comment about the implementing the resolutions, all these words to urge, to recognize, to call, they all require listening. And back to your comment earlier about listening is, it's just so key, right? It's not just telling people what to do.
You start with listening, right? Which for me is hard to do, by the way. But, you know, it's a discipline. You gotta learn it. Yeah. Okay, I think we're probably out of time, so.
I just, I was gonna say, Dr. Stewart, is
Thank you.
part of, I think, how we engage this is what you have done today is by, you just give people a couple pages to read together and let the wisdom and the conversation come from within. And it's a huge statement, and it could take a year or more to get through it, but that's a year of really deep conversations. And I think back to, for those of you who weren't at our fall theological conference a couple of years ago, when now presiding Bishop Curry was with us, and he has expertise in community organization. And he said, you don't have to have everybody. You just have to have those who have a passion for it. And so starting that conversation with this document that you now have in your hands with a couple other people and just see what wisdom comes from you all is a really good place to start. So I appreciate your modeling that kind of environment here. So thank you, Stewart, for your time.